our own Prime Minister saying that if given a mandate, her government will act immediately to call together 150 unelected people to tell them whether or not it would be a good idea to act on the mandate which we have given them. And that kind of attitude underlines this kind of law. You see, it's a case of, well, we won't actually act on Hazelwood, but we will move immediately to penalise anyone who dares criticise us for our action. The Hazelwood Power Station was due to close in 2005, and in that year, Peter Batchelor, as the relevant minister, announced that its life would be extended to 2031. International Power had bought it knowing that it would close in 2005, and yet we gave this massive windfall to this foreign-owned company. And we did so because we hadn't done the necessary planning. Now, one thing that I think needs to be said in the Australian context is this. The market in Australia has never, ever produced a major piece of infrastructure. There's no example. Roads, rail, power stations, they are not produced by the market in this country. The way we have done it is through elected governments. And that's important because the corporatisation of our infrastructure has led to a paradigm of private ownership in relation to this infrastructure in circumstances where actually it's ours. It's the people's, it's the communities. And decisions about the future of those pieces of infrastructure are not mere commercial decisions. They are vital political decisions. And that's why free speech is very important, because free speech is about the democratic process. You know, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt were devising their 4 freedoms in the 1930s and 1940s in opposition to the totalitarian regimes of the time, what did they say? The first of these 4 freedoms is freedom of speech. You know, in the United States they have a Bill of Rights, and their Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And people in the US know those 10 amendments. And I guess people in Australia know them too, because you would have seen TV shows where they talk about taking the 5th, which is the right to silence. That's the 5th Amendment to the Constitution. Well, the First Amendment is freedom of speech. That's the First Amendment to the US Constitution. And why does it matter? Because in political communication, if you can't talk about something without fear of prosecution and make your point in other ways, if necessary by protest, then there can be no decision about your point because no one knows about it. We cast our votes in a blackout. In the United States, probably the leading decision on free speech and the First Amendment is the case of the US and Abrams. This was a number of anarchists who in about 1919 handed out leaflets in New York calling for a revolutionary overthrow of the government. And they were prosecuted and they were sentenced to 20 years jail. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, whereby 3-2 majority their appeal was denied and they served their 20 years in jail. But the two dissenting judgments have been relied on ever since as the great authorities on the issue of the First Amendment. And the dissenting judges were Oliver Wendell Holmes and Justice Brandeis. There are two Oliver Wendell Holmes. This is Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. His father is the famous essayist, but Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. was also a great essayist in his own right, as well as a famous jurist. And in that judgment they talk about the concept of the marketplace of ideas. They say, I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes said, the Constitution of the United States is an experiment. Like all of life is an experiment. Incidentally, quoting the great essayist Emerson in making that statement. All of life is an experiment. How will we know whether our experiment is right or not unless it can be tested against other ideas? Let us put it out into, and he used the term, I think for the first time in any court case, the marketplace of ideas. So we can see whether it stands up. If we're going to stifle free speech, we stifle our democracy itself. Now, some of the elements of these offences have been dealt with. It is unprecedented to have a law which makes mere presence on land a criminal offence. At common law and statute, it has long been the case that the offence of trespass, and indeed the tort of trespass, is only complete upon request to leave and a failure to leave on that request. That's been whittled away in various ways over the years, but that's the primary position. There is an offence of forcible entry which goes back to 1381. It's called the Statute of Richard II. Forcible entry is the offence of taking possession of the land by force. You have to have an intention to occupy the land. It's often referred to in landlord and tenant disputes and things like that, but generally not regarded as important in the law. In the 1980s, this suddenly got discovered by the Greensboro CIB, and they charged a young man called Prideaux with forcible entry just for going onto land, and the High Court, in their consideration of the case, said no. You have to have an intention to take possession of the land. It's not talking about just going onto the land. Well, that was well and good, except that the Kennett government reenacted the law in a different place and expressly provided that you don't have to have an intention to take possession of the land. So it now means you have to go on land in a manner likely to cause a breach of the peace. Go on any land, anywhere, could be public land, in a manner likely to cause a breach of the peace. A contentious placard at a rally might be enough. So you've got this very broad provision. Just this year, I've finished a long case, 4-month case in South Australia, acting for a group of 10 protesters who were bashed up and locked in a shipping container at the Beverley uranium mine out in the desert. And in the judgment, they were awarded, the 10 of them, $750,000. In the judgment, they the judge, Justice Anderson of the Supreme Court, actually said, and I think this is an important precedent, that the protesters had a right to protest. And that was a very important decision, in my view. We don't know whether we will succeed or fail on the issue of the climate crisis. But we do know that we can have a voice, a say in relation to it. And when we are at the end point of our lives considering the climate crisis, whatever the result, I personally don't want to be found wanting, not having done what could be done. And as Martin Luther King said, in the end we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Thank you.